order. John Lamont to move the motion.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, which I think is the first time you've been in the chair, so congratulations on your position. I beg to move that this House has considered transport links between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. I'm pleased to bring forward this debate today to highlight the significance and importance of improving transport links between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. My constituency sits in the very south of Scotland, right next to England. That's one of the reasons why I was such a passionate campaigner for remaining in the Union in the 2014 independence referendum, and why I continue to believe firmly in Scotland's place within the UK. In the Scottish borders, many of my constituents have family just a few miles away. In England, most have friends just over the border. People often head to England for days out and to socialise. Some travel south every day to work, others come north to do the same. Others regularly go south for medical treatment, especially since the SNP wrecked Scotland's NHS. Our lives are interconnected, and so our transport network must be appropriately connected too. People's everyday lives depend on good, safe, reliable and affordable transport across the borders and down to England. Today I want to talk about the railway and road connections between Scotland and the rest of the UK. I'll raise some of the key routes, the challenges to improve them and the opportunities that are available if we do improve them. Firstly, the Borders Railway. The Borders Railway has undoubtedly been a great success story since it was restored between Edinburgh and Tweed Bank. For many years, I've been working hard with local campaigners to see the Borders Railway extended to Hawick, Newcastleton and on to Carlisle. I've been doing everything I can to keep making the positive case for the extension. I firmly believe the extension of the Borders Railway would be a game changer for our local area. In the general election campaign last year, I pledged to work hard to deliver the extension that we all want to see. I will keep my promise to local people by spending the next parliamentary term focused on advancing this project. I'm seeking to bring together a cross-party consensus about the importance of this extension. I will work constructively with the Scottish Government where possible, and I intend to have open dialogue with the new Labour Government on what we can do to achieve this project together. This does not need to be a party political issue. It can be something where we work together in the interests of not only the borders, but the south of Scotland and north of England too. Indeed, the previous United Kingdom Conservative Government worked constructively with the Scottish Government and in March 2021 agreed to jointly invest £10 million for a study to look at the feasibility of extending the railway to Hawick, Newcastleton and onto Carlisle. Unfortunately, with real regret, I have to say that it appears the Labour Government simply do not grasp the importance of extending the Borders Railway and are not willing to do what's right, not only for the people of the borders, but for the commuters and people travelling between Scotland and England. I have not been encouraged by the early signs from the new government regarding the Borders Railway extension. After writing to seek assurances about Labour's commitment to the project, I received a response from the Minister of State for Rail, Lord Peter Hendy. He said Labour will review previous transport commitments, assess this proposal, and he was not able to comment on next steps regarding the scheme. I find that response very poor, considering the importance to our economy and public transport network of the extension of the Borders Railway to the wider area. Better rail services would be a fantastic boost to people across the Scottish borders. The Borders Railway extension could unlock economic potential, create thousands of jobs, improve social mobility and transform the local rail network. However, despite the commitment I mentioned from the previous Conservative Government to provide funding for a feasibility study to take place, the new UK Labour Government has refused to give the same commitment for the funding of the feasibility study. Many local people have told me they now feel that Labour Government is betraying the people of the borders by putting this feasibility study on hold. At the very least, I would argue, it is worth progressing the feasibility study so we can establish the most effective and efficient way to proceed. It is crucial that this feasibility study goes ahead so that a proper assessment of the railway can be undertaken. I will continue to work with the Campaign for Borders Rail to further this project. However, I also want to talk about other train services from Berwick upon Tweed and the importance of this station to the Scottish borders and south east Scotland. Now, there are proposals by the rail industry and Network Rail to change the frequency and journey times from Berwick-upon-Tweed to London. Although some routes from Berwick going north are to be improved, the number of trains going south to London will fall substantially. The proposed changes to the timetable will mean that there will be just 11 trains on weekdays, down from 15, and only 8 on weekends, down from 12. That means at least 25% fewer trains will go from Berwick to London, which will not help people travelling south for work and won't allow people to get around the country easily. I've raised my concerns as recently as this morning with the rail industry, particularly LNER, but I'm afraid the response has been extremely disappointing. The industry believe that the changes will be positive because there will be faster and more frequent services from Newcastle and Edinburgh. This will undoubtedly improve connectivity for passengers in those cities, but I fear those rail travellers from small-town UK and the rural communities that these stations serve will yet again be left behind. Moving on from the railways, I also want to raise the importance of roads to rural areas and to the wider economy. Yes.
Before he moves on, very grateful to him for giving way. When it comes to Scotland and England, Northern England transport links, does he have a view upon the practice of Avanti, who of course run the West Coast route from London Euston to Glasgow, that whenever there is any kind of problem on the line north of Preston, whether it be in North Lancashire, Cumbria or the south of Scotland, that the habit of Avanti is to stop all trains at Preston? Everything between Preston and Glasgow, be it Oxenholme, be it Motherwell, has no service whatsoever. Does he think Avanti are in breach, at least in the principle of their contract, in failing to serve North Lancashire, Cumbria and Scotland?
I'm grateful for the right honourable member for raising that point. I do think, I'm not going to comment on the legality of whether they have breached their contract. I do think there is an issue, or at least a perception, that the train companies very often north of Manchester or north of Birmingham do not think those customers and those passengers are as important as those in the south. I think that's the point that he is making. We need to remember, for very often those communities and those passengers travelling in those services in the northern part of the UK and in Scotland, in many cases they're much more dependent on those services because there's so few alternatives services and options if there is disruption on the trains. I think he makes a very important point. As I say, I want to move on from railways and talk a little bit about the importance of roads to rural areas and to the wider economy. More than 60% of visitors to Scotland from the rest of the United Kingdom arrived by car in 2023, showing how vital our roads are to tourism and to the Scottish economy. Fixing the roads should be high on the agenda of both this Labour government and the SNP government in Holyrood. For many years, the SNP failed to invest in local roads. The state of the roads, sadly, in the Scottish borders has declined substantially on the Nationalist watch. The dire state of our roads is putting public safety at risk and increasing the cost of driving as more cars need to be repaired after hitting potholes. While they always try to deflect blame, it is on the SNP to step up and give councils the cash they need to fix our roads. Councils across Scotland can't fix the roads because the SNP government keeps cutting their funding. Now, unfortunately, it looks like Labour are following a very similar approach to the SNP. It was devastating news last year that Labour have decided to scrap plans to dual the A1 in Northumberland after many years of campaigning, both by myself, other MPs and many local people and businesses who rely on that road, who are desperate to see this vital road improved. This road connects the Scottish borders to England. It's vital for our economy, it supports jobs and helps to promote trade. This is yet another terrible decision by Labour from their budget, which will have damaging consequences for workers, families and businesses across the borders. And it gives me no hope that... Yes, absolutely.
Thank you for good way. He's doing a fantastic job representing his constituents, Madam Chair. Can I ask, though, how the honourable gentleman would fund this project? Because the Labour government has said the money is not here just now. So how would the honourable gentleman like to see that funded, and also fund the feasibility of extending the Borders Rail to Carlisle? Where's the funding going to come from for these projects?
I'm grateful for the honourable member's intervention. The funding for the Borders Railway feasibility is part of a legally binding agreement, the Borderlands Growth Deal, between the United Kingdom Government and the Scottish Government. That money was allocated by my right honourable friend sitting behind me whilst he was Secretary of State. So the money has been allocated within UK government budgets for that feasibility study. The Scottish Government committed to that money on the back of the UK Government's commitment. Some of the UK Government committed to it on the back of the Scottish Government's commitment. So the money is undoubtedly there. It just needs to be unlocked. And that is my frustration, and that's the frustration of my local authority as well, Scottish Borders Council. In relation to the A1 Julian, it's a cross-party campaign to get that road improved. That is why, and in response to the decision by the Labour government to scrap that, Julian, your colleague, the Labour member for North Northumberland, described it as a deeply disappointing decision. I think he shares my concern. He and I have the same view on this. We need to see investment in infrastructure so that our constituents in rural areas like those in the Borders and North Northumberland can benefit from the same type of investment in transport as his constituents enjoy in Edinburgh. This metropolitan outlook which some members opposite have in terms of ensuring that only cities can get good transport, you should not forget the rural communities like those in the Borders. I suspect, looking at the representation opposite me, we're going to get a very skewed central belt view of transport and connectivity. But moving on, I fear that the previous decisions of the Labour government gives us no hope that other essential roads will see the improvements that they need, such as the A68, which runs from Darlington up to near Edinburgh, or the A7, which stretches from Carlisle to Edinburgh as well. Those roads barely seem to register on either Labour or the SNP's list of priorities. I will keep campaigning for better roads across the Borders, despite Labour and the SNP refusing to make the improvements that motorists need. We need to see much more ambition from the government here at Westminster and at Holyrood to advance Scotland's infrastructure. Railways, roads and other transport routes between Scotland and England are vital, not just for people to get around, but to maintain and enhance the connections between our people, to allow families to visit each other and to go on holidays across the UK, to help aspirational business owners to engage with customers and clients in other parts of the country, to allow people to easily work and socialise wherever they live in Scotland or in the rest of the UK. And beyond the direct immediate impact on people, better transport routes will improve our economy. It will raise productivity and help to contribute more to tax revenues and to improve public services. At a time when we desperately need to raise levels of economic growth, investing in infrastructure is an ideal way to do that. But not only that, better transport routes would also help to protect our environment. It would help us to reach net zero faster by encouraging more people to use public transport and by reducing emissions. There are a whole host of benefits that could be achieved by improving transport links across our United Kingdom. That is what we should aspire to, a more connected country where people can travel freely between Scotland and the rest of the UK for work, to visit family and to spend time with friends wherever they are on these islands. Thank you.
I remind members that they should be bobbing if they wish to be called in today's debate. The question is that this House has considered transport links between Scotland and the rest of the UK. I call John Grady.
I'm obliged, and thank you, Mrs Llewellyn-Buck. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship and serve under the chairship of somewhere from the South Shields, from which I've got some family, to a wonderful place. And I thank the honourable member for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk for securing such an important debate today, and he spoke very eloquently about transport in his seat. I would just gently remind him, when he mentions net zero, that it is the Conservative government that had an offshore wind allocation round that secured no bids when we desperately need clean, cheap, fixed-priced electricity. And I would gently remind the member that the last time I checked, much of these transport links were under the supervision of a Conservative government from 2010 to 2019, with some art and part assistance from another party in the early years. Improving connectivity between Glasgow and the rest of the UK is a topic that is deeply important to my constituents, and it's a topic that I've been working hard on since I was elected in July. Glasgow is Scotland's largest city, and as we head into its 850th anniversary celebrations this year, we have much to celebrate. A vibrant city with so much economic and cultural potential. And improving connectivity of Glasgow and England is crucial to realising that potential. A high-quality intercity service attracts investment and talent. It is critical for people in our vibrant creative, scientific, cultural and energy sectors. It is critical for people coming to Glasgow to work and people coming to enjoy our city's brilliant cultural, sporting and nighttime economy, and people visiting friends and family. So I turn first to deal with links with cities in the east served by the East Coast Main Line. Previously, Glasgow had an excellent direct train service heading to the east of England and connecting Glasgow with cities such as Newcastle, Durham and York. In 2010, there were 10 direct trains running on this service, run by both LNER and Cross Country. Now, there is only one service per day. So under the Tory regime, 9 out of 10 services have been cut. Yet another blow to getting economic growth into Glasgow. I got in touch with Cross Country to ask them about the severe reductions to their service and to have a chat about increasing the frequency of their service. And I'm disappointed and a little surprised that I have yet to receive a reply, and I trust I will receive a reply soon. I did, however, meet with the Chief Executive of LNER to discuss the decision made back in April to scrap the last remaining service connecting Glasgow and the North East operated by them. I was clear that I was in full favour of any attempt to revive this service, and I will be keen to engage with the Minister on this. I am aware that Lumo have made an application to run a service, extending a service from Edinburgh to Glasgow Queen Street, and I'm keen to hear more about that proposal, as it demonstrates fundamentally that there is untapped demand for direct travel from Glasgow to the northeast of England and Yorkshire. And I'm interested in anything that increases connectivity between the north and northeast of England and Glasgow. With 9 out of 10 direct train services cut over the last years, we need improvements. The Conservatives' record of connectivity for Glasgow is, I'm afraid, nothing short of abysmal. And may I say to members from Scotland, that isn't just a question for Glasgow, it affects people across the west coast of Scotland, including in the countryside, who rely on those services. Now let's talk briefly, if I may, about connectivity to the northwest, the Midlands and London, which is also very important for Glasgow. For many years, Avanti West Coast have operated that service, and it has, to be charitable, left a lot to be desired. And even the last Conservative government accepted that the poor performance was appalling. The Conservative government's response to that appalling service has always puzzled me somewhat. In autumn 2023, they awarded Avanti West Coast a 9-year extension. Avanti's response was to cut the services in the run-up to Christmas. I thought it was only good children who got presents at Christmas, but there you are. Problems persist. Between July and September 2024, only 41% of Avanti services were deemed to be on time. Reliability is crucial for such an important service, and the current reliability is not acceptable. Our Labour government has inherited an absolute mess of a transport system after years of neglect and poor policy making. The government is absolutely committed to boosting economic growth in all areas of UK, including Glasgow and Scotland, and this is something I am 100% proud to support. In order to achieve this, we must, of course, be ambitious in our plans to improve transport, and it is absolutely essential that Glasgow is not left behind due to poor transport links with the major cities in England. This will take time. 14 years of Tory failure has left our transport system in a mess. And I'm reassured that the government is committed to working hard to get our railways back on track. And I fully support these efforts, which will take time to yield results, but we must, of course, stick with them. I'm obliged. Thank you very much, Mrs. Lewell-Buck.
As you can see, there's lots of members wanting to speak this afternoon, so could members please stick to a 4-minute informal time limit so that everybody gets in. John Cooper.
Madam Chairman, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and may I congratulate my right honourable friend, the member for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk, for securing this important debate. I was a teenage newspaper reporter when I first was confronted with the horrific reality of a collision between a car and an articulated lorry. A senior policeman told me there had been 4 fatalities when a lorry and car crashed on the A75 road just outside my hometown of Stranraer, in what is now my Dumfries and Galloway constituency. The policeman added, "I know there's 4 dead only because I can see 4 right feet." 40 years later, that same A75 continues to exact an awful toll, for the total traffic volumes it carries are much bigger, and the Arctics are themselves larger too. Tragically, there have been 2 more recent fatalities when cars and lorries collided on the A75 in September and again in November. Chair, the A75 is gloriously titled the Euro route, but set aside any notions of a multi-lane ribbon of shining asphalt. It's largely 2 lanes, is filled with dangerous bends, blind dips, adverse camber, and grinds through villages which should have been bypassed decades ago. It even has a light-controlled cattle crossing. This despite the fact that the A75 services the key port of Cairnryan and carries, estimates vary, but perhaps as much as 60% of Northern Ireland's goods in and out. Transport is devolved to the Scottish Government, so why on earth are we here in this place discussing this road? Well, this will be news for the Minister, but the previous Conservative administration undertook a review of UK connectivity and identified the A75 as being of national significance. It's the key traffic artery running right through Dumfries and Galloway, yes, but it's also the critical link between Northern Ireland, Scotland and England. It's screaming out for improvements, yet the road is treated with supreme indifference by the Scottish Government. They complained that the UK Government, even looking at the A75, was a power grab, alleging we were trampling on devolution by even launching a connectivity review. Officials were ordered not to cooperate with that review by Sir Peter, now Lord Hendy. It meant that he had to drive the full length of the A75, inch by painful inch, using only Google Street View. Since my election, I have been trying to find out what is happening with money earmarked for improvements to the A75 under the last Conservative government. I have established that the money has not been swallowed up by the questionable fiscal black hole the Chancellor blames for all ills, but with the Department of Transport here convinced the issue sits in Edinburgh, and Edinburgh inscrutable at best, we have an impasse. Chair, the First Minister of Scotland, motivated no doubt by looming Holyrood parliamentary elections, has deigned to visit the A75 to see for himself how overwhelmed it truly is. Labour boasts about a reset of relations with the Scottish Government, yet sadly the Secretary of State for Scotland was unable to take up my suggestion that, given the supposed love-in between Dover House and Bute House, he should share a car with the First Minister John Swinney on that visit. Mr Swinney says he now understands the depth of feeling about the A75. Empty words which leave those on both sides of the North Channel frustrated by the state of this vital cross-border road. Chair, will the Minister give my constituents an update on where the UK taxpayers' money for this road has gone, and will she press the case for the UK Department of Transport to accept it has a stake in seeing a rolling programme of improvements on the A75 on both safety and economic grounds? The current mode of this government is to devolve and forget, to throw a block grant up north to Edinburgh and to then wash their hands of the matter. This is not what devolution is about. The A75 is a classic example of where the UK government ought to act in the best interests of the people of Britain and not allow devolution to be an excuse for inaction. Livelihoods and indeed lives are truly at risk here. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today. I'd also like to thank the honourable member for securing this important debate today, not least because it provides an opportunity for me to talk about the challenges facing my own constituency of Bathgate and Linlithgow. And whilst this debate focuses on transport links between Scotland and the rest of the UK, it would be remiss to ignore the challenges facing smaller rural communities, and yes, we do have them in the Central Belt, that rely on local transport links for people to make their way to Edinburgh or Glasgow for onward travel to elsewhere in the UK. A prime example of the challenges is in Winchborough, one of the fastest growing villages in Scotland that will soon be a town. However, the residents can't even get a train to Edinburgh, never mind across the border to England. Now, many families moved there in the full expectation of regular and reliable transport, but there's been no such ambition from the Scottish Government. For a number of years, well, since 2012, there has been a question over how a station will be funded after Transport Scotland prevented West Lothian Council from making delivery of the station a condition of planning consent. But changes have already been made on the main line Glasgow-Edinburgh timetable for a stop in Winchborough. So the train could stop there, but there's no train station to stop at. So people are having to take almost an hour on the bus, or they're jumping into their cars. So whilst there has been progress in recent times, it's been far too slow. And Scottish Government ministers absolutely must prioritise this station and ensure its delivery. And I take my hat off to the villagers who have campaigned tirelessly for years to keep this issue in the public spotlight. And it must really be a thorn in their side to watch the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Fiona Hislop, their own constituency MSP, open train stations and train lines across the country whilst they continue to have to fight for a train station in Winchborough. And now we hear of another challenge facing railway users. ScotRail's plans to reduce ticket office hours at 54 stations, Lithgow being one of them. And these proposals raise really serious concerns, particularly around safety and accessibility for passengers. Many women have expressed a preference for well-staffed stations where they feel safer. And these reductions in hours, particularly in the evening, risk exacerbating these safety concerns. And additionally, the proposed cuts undermine efforts to ensure accessibility for disabled passengers, many of whom rely on assistance provided by station staff. And on top of this, we have rising rail fares with a recent hike of 8.7%. And that continues to make public transport less accessible and affordable for many. And whilst there are all these challenges facing the railways, local communities are further impacted by significant reductions in bus services, 44% since the SNP took over in 2007, because they're often treated as the poor relation to trains when it comes to investment from the Scottish Government. But they're a vital way of keeping local communities connected and indeed linking people to train services and airports. And this lack of joined-up strategic thinking from the Scottish Government is having a significant impact. And this is all set against the backdrop of the climate crisis, where we're aiming for people to make a shift from their cars into public transport. But that can't happen if the infrastructure and the services aren't there for them to make that choice in the first place. So we must be looking at other parts of the UK where things are working well, like the B network in Manchester. Let's work together, use best practice to ensure the whole of the UK can remain connected in a way that is affordable and flexible. Thank you.
Thanks. Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Luck. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, and I congratulate the honourable member for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk for obtaining the time for this debate, which is timely and important. I was particularly impressed by the way in which he brought so many people across the party divides together in the chamber when he made his comments with regard to Edinburgh. Now, the honourable gentleman spoke in particular about road and rail services. He'll forgive me if I take a different focus. Anybody leaving Orkney on the 6:30 ferry would be lucky to get to London much before 10:15 at night. If you drove, going through, of course, the still unjewelled A9 from Inverness to Perth, you'd be lucky if you got here much before 8:30 at night. So for us, the most important links between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom, and indeed then the rest of the world, are air links. The code share that is operated between Loganair and British Airways is enormously important for us, for business travel and also for the visitor economy. We have tourists coming to Orkney and to Shetland from across the world, and curiously, very few of them seem to have heard of Loganair. But they've all heard of British Airways. So when they go on the British Airways website, to be able to book a ticket that will take you from anywhere in the world to Heathrow and then on through Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Inverness into Orkney and to Shetland is enormously important for us. That code share sometimes works better than others, but it always is a very, very important service. The reliance, though, on Heathrow can be something of a mixed blessing for air passengers going from anywhere in Scotland to the rest of the United Kingdom and onward. Heathrow is a massively busy airport. There is a plane lands at Heathrow every 45 seconds. So it doesn't take an awful lot, be it weather, some technological breakdown or whatever unforeseen event there is going to be for that disruption to happen. And when that disruption happens, the consequences are always felt most acutely by the short-haul domestic services. And in Britain, that effectively now is Scotland, because there are very few short-haul services going through Heathrow to anywhere else in the world. And that, I know, is something that causes constant anxiety, irritation amongst passengers going from Scotland to elsewhere in the United Kingdom. And the feeling is always that we are actually harder done by than everybody else. Now, I can understand how this happens, but actually recent discussions I've had with Heathrow have given me some, with British Airways, have given me some insight into how this actually happens. There are arrangements in place between the airlines using Heathrow that should spread the pain, so to speak. But essentially, because Heathrow is such a dominant performer in Heathrow, the other airlines are frankly able to ignore the agreements that there are in place. And as a consequence, it is British Airways services and British Airways services coming from Scotland in particular who are then left to bear the brunt. So British Airways are the ones who get the criticism, but actually they are not necessarily the ones at fault. They tell me that this is something that the CAA, Heathrow Airport, the airlines operating at Heathrow and the Department for Transport could actually fix between them. And I think my ask for the Minister when she comes to sum up is to make clear whether she will act as the spokesperson for the interlocutor for Scotland's air passengers in dealing with these bodies and in particular the Department for Transport to make sure that we are not always the ones who are left behind.
Your chairship. I also congratulate the Honourable Member for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk for securing this important debate. Connectivity across these islands is vital for our economic growth and prosperity. We are an island nation, our economy is export-led and also service-led too. These facts reinforce the vital economic importance of excellent connectivity within Scotland, with the wider UK and beyond. Yes, of course, technology and the COVID pandemic have changed some working patterns and made online and virtual business interaction commonplace. But a recent WPI economic report made clear businesses continue to rely on good physical connectivity to cement relationships, to enter new markets, to conduct supply chain due diligence and to share knowledge. Which is why it's so disappointing that the record of the SNP Scottish Government on transport, both intra-Scotland connectivity as well as connectivity with the rest of the UK and beyond, is so poor. Let's take rail to begin with. The latest Network Rail report shows that annually there are 70 million passenger journeys made across Scotland's railways. Of these trips, a total of 9.2 million were made to and from England and Wales. But what waits travellers from the rest of the UK when they arrive in Scotland? Unfortunately, they're frequently greeted with a shambolic and declining transport system. Nationalising ScotRail should have been the opportunity to put passengers first, and many of my Livingston constituency constituents require the train every day to get to and from Edinburgh for work, and they require a reliable and affordable service. However, in August, the SNP scrapped a pilot that removed peak rail fares, despite the scheme increasing rail journeys by 6.8%. An SNP Scottish Government policy that worked, but of course they then scrapped it. Last month's budget in Holyrood, the SNP committed to reducing spending on rail services by £80 million, a profoundly regressive move. And last month, they've also confirmed that they're delaying their target to decarbonise rail from 2035 to 2045, confirming that Scotland's long-suffering rail passengers will have to wait an extra decade for the modern rail services that they were promised. An affordable, reliable rail service can unlock huge environmental and economic benefits, but Scots are again paying the price of the SNP financial and transport mismanagement for that. Another area I want to turn to is aviation. Because our inner island is an export service-based economy, aviation links are vital. The UK has a huge built-in advantages as a services exporter on a global scale, and the location where key economic sectors benefit from international connections. But the record of the Scottish Government here is very unsatisfactory. Our airports continue to struggle against the indifference and perhaps even hostility of this SNP government. With Glasgow Airport once connected Scotland with North America has no link, and apparently there's no desire or drive or ideas from the Scottish Government to assist to bring that back. Of course, Mrs Lowe-Buck, there are understandable and justifiable concerns about the impact of aviation on climate change. But the answer, however, is not to neglect our aviation centre, but enthusiastic engagement with them to improve technology, to invest in sustainable aviation, and to help the new and modernisation of airspace. Sustainable aviation has a huge possible economic and environmental benefit, not least to Grangemouth and the wider economy of Scotland. And I'm delighted to see that UK Labour Government has at least recognised the potential of SAF as a source of clean energy and green jobs in Scotland and across the UK, and has pledged to promote it. If only the Scottish Government had the same foresight, energy ambition. So on rail, as we've heard today, on buses, on road and air, the SNP Scottish Government continues to let down the Livingston constituency and Scotland as well.
To ensure all members get in and we have the front bench contributions, going to need to impose a 3-minute time limit. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, can I wish you all the best in your new role as Chair in your first Westminster Hall. I'm sure there are plenty more of them. I can also thank the honourable member for Berkshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk for setting the scene. And I wish the new Minister well in her role, and equally the Shadow Minister in the role that he plays as well, just to keep the record okay, because he always reminds me of these things, you know. Can I say, I want to first of all just a bit of history. Scotland and Northern Ireland were once joined by a path hewed by giants, or so the legend says, giants that we remain, giants of industry, giants of culture, and we have the ability and the facility to do even better and to be more. And I always said this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland always better together, and today we will prove that to be the case. I can support fully the efforts for the A75 and the A77, but I want to focus, if I can, on the ferry links, because they're really vitally important. An issue of transport links is the ferry links. The operators from the beginning of December regarded the difficulties highlighting during these winter storms, beginning with Storm Bert, and the effect it had upon the business, trade and tourism links between Scotland and Northern Ireland. An intricate part of the UK are the ferry dependent, and we need to secure those links. Stena Line were in control or in contact with me regarding issues that must be addressed to continue an operational and effective transport route within the UK. A mechanical issue with the Superfast 7 ferry on the Belfast to Cairnryan route during Storm Bert emphasised the critical need for flexibility in managing workforce and operational changes within the ferry sector. Had that happened in the Black Friday or the pre-Christmas period, there had been absolutely chaos. And underscores the necessity of solutions such as the ferry worker concession. And I asked the Minister a specific question in relation to that, to ensure that operators like Stena Line can swiftly deploy vessels and staff to maintain resilience and continuity in the face of inevitable future disruptions. For example, during previous staffing challenges faced by P&O, Stena Line were able to deploy the Nordica and the Belfast to Cairnryan route, formalising a process between the Government and the ferry operators to enable similar measures in future emergencies would be highly beneficial. The ferry routes across the Irish Sea are a natural, vital national infrastructure that ensured trade, tourism, essential services flow. If the routes weren't able to operate in the future, we don't have, unfortunately, some of the qualified seafarers that are necessary. That means empty shelves. That means the economy is affected, medical supplies, and that's something I believe that my Scottish brethren and sisters would not wish to see happen. Scotland is a vital cog in the operation of the UK machine, and we must ensure that it is accessible, affordably and reliably. And this can only be done with infrastructure investment in the ports by land and sea. And I encourage Government to foster this connectivity, put the funding in place, stronger together and achieving more together. And the Northern Ireland Scotland Link is a vital part of that strength. Thank you.
Thank you, I congratulate the member for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk for securing this important debate, because it's an issue that goes to the heart of the economic and environmental goals of the government. I represent Edinburgh City Centre and have Waverley Station at the heart of my constituency. So I want to focus on the railway links between Edinburgh and the rest of the UK, because Waverley is our gateway to the rest of the UK. And are members aware that Waverley Station is the only railway station in the world named after a novel? I'm sure the honourable gentleman finds that very metropolitan, but we like it. Edinburgh is the economic powerhouse of Scotland, and I would argue it is central to our economic development. We have world-class universities, globally significant biotech and informatics, the energy transition on our doorstep, a legal and financial sector, and of course the cultural sector. All brilliant, all economically critical, none incubated in Edinburgh alone, all dependent on our transport and infrastructural links with the rest of the UK. The rest of the UK, the rest of Scotland, and of course especially London. And we do it through Waverley. Waverley has 21 million entries and exits a year, 60 journeys a day to London. We receive 1.9 million overnight visits to Edinburgh from outside Scotland. Yes, that's tourism, but it's critically business visits as well. The transport infrastructure is critical to our city's labour market. 2 data points. Since the pandemic, for the first time, more journeys between Edinburgh and London were by rail than anything else, 57%. At the same time, working from home has increased from 12% before the pandemic to 30% currently. Can I ask, is the House familiar with the concept of Willies? Not unparliamentary language, but a new acronym in Edinburgh. Work in London, live in Edinburgh. What we are seeing with new capacities to work from home, with new rail travel, this is of benefit to both cities. It contributes to economic dynamism, it allows couples with 2 professional careers to allow both to thrive, it allows employers access to a bigger labour market, and it relies on effective national infrastructure. So can I ask the Minister to recognise the importance of that? And then finally, I want to draw attention to the development of the new Lumo service. Lumo has expanded capacity as an open access operator, accessing tracks through the regulator. But I note the Transport Secretary is reviewing the role of the regulator in managing open access. Will the Minister commit to the Scotland Office liaising with DfT to ensure we take account of the developments on the London-Edinburgh line? Thank you.
On your chairship. I also congratulate the honourable member for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk on securing this important debate. As the SNP's transport spokesperson in Westminster, cross-border connectivity issues feature high in the agenda. A lot has been said about the strategic trunk roads, the A74M, the A1, the various border routes, the A68, the A7 and such like. And the investment that is required in our roads network is vital. And I know that colleagues in the Scottish Government are very much aware of the pressures on the core roads network and the work required to both maintain and upgrade it. The one point I would pick up from the proposal of the motion, though, is the reference to the Scottish Government's alleged failure to invest in trunk roads, when it's a statement of fact that the capital provided to the Scottish Government was amongst the worst settlements that have ever been made under the previous government, which the honourable member was the honourable member's party. So, yes.
Speaking with some knowledge on this subject, but he will know that the Scottish Government has wasted hundreds of millions of pounds on ferries, which there's major questions about. Would the honourable gentleman rather that money was spent on the trunk roads he's referring to?
I think
I accept the point that's made about ferries, and that I would rather that the overspending in ferries and that they'd arrived in time, and that the overspend didn't exist. But when you can put that in comparison with HS2 as an example, billions of pounds overspent, and the benefit to Scotland is diminished to near zero. There are other examples as well. The Scottish Parliament building in Edinburgh was signed off by a Labour government and was massively overspent. It wasn't the MSPs that supervised that and, or had the oversight of that. So there are examples across all parties of issues with infrastructure projects. The important thing is obviously to learn from them and do something about it and avoid it happening again, which I fully support. Looking to the south-west of Scotland, I did stay in Galloway for a couple of years, and I know very well what the A75 is like. It's a vital link to Northern Ireland through the ports at Cairnryan, and there is work ongoing there. I welcome the cross-party efforts that have been worked on that, and I hope they can continue in terms of the design of improvements to the road. Very much support that, and I know colleagues in the Scottish Government do as well. Turning to rail, there's been a lot of work between the Scottish Government and the UK Government and a lot of discussion around rail issues. I very much welcome the public ownership of rail bill. We fully support that. Rail was already in public ownership in Scotland, but the bill has, in fairness, enabled us to ensure that will continue, because it was as an operator of last resort, so there wasn't a surety about that, but now there is. Again, very much welcome that. A question I would ask the Minister to address in summing up is whether an assurance can be given that a strong level of engagement will happen with the Scottish Government as the bill develops prior to its publication, because there's I think there's a lot of mutual interest in this and in getting it right, and I hope that can be much of that can be addressed prior to the publication of the bill. Finally, turning on to rail with the limited time available. It's vital that we retain the protected slots at the key hub airports. They are absolutely critical to onward connections to the rest of the world. Preempting a question that I've been selected for tomorrow, which allows me to give a bit more context around it, is the importance of EGNOS, which is the European Geostationary Navigation Overlay System. It's very technical, and
Jamie Stone.
Went too far.
Thank you very much, and congratulations on your appointment. I'm sure you'll do the job with elegance for many years to come. Look, it's already been said, hasn't it? My right honourable friend, the member for Orkney and Shetland, makes the point that some of us have to use roads to get to airports to fly to here. And he's mentioned the disgrace of the A9. I was there in Holyrood when Alex Salmond promised the dualling of the A9. I was there, actually, when Alex Salmond promised the dualling of the A96. And a hollow after that one, there were still traffic lights on the railway bridge at Oyne. They're just simply not competent to run the transport in Scotland. But here's the point. Just like Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland, we need flights to make up for the lack of proper transport on the ground. Right now, we have one flight in and out of Wick Airport from Eastern Airways, which is better than none, I admit. And we had to fight to get the public service, the PSO for that. But we got it. But the fact is that if we are going to ensure the economic regeneration of the Far North, of Caithness, as Dounreay, which was the dynamo of the economy of the Far North, as that runs down and is decommissioned, we're going to have to encourage other industries to come in. And I'm sure that laudable work will be done by the government on that front. But if we don't have the flights in and out of Wick Airport, it's not going to help very much. Because while the Aberdeen flight to Wick is welcome, we need flights to Edinburgh, we need flights to Bristol, wherever we can, and it would make all the difference. So, Madam Chair, I'm going to conclude my remarks with that, with a very simple plea. Please, can we get more flights in and out of Wick Airport? We need them desperately. Thank you.
Jim Alistair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to focus my remarks on the A75, because it has already been alluded to. It's a vital artery for Northern Ireland, because through it and from it passes most of our incoming and outgoing goods. And it is a road which is so heavily trafficked by HGVs that it is 95 miles of length. a torture for many to drive. The last figures I saw indicated that, surprisingly, 20% of all vehicles on the A75 are HGVs. Now, when you consider that only 1.3% of all registered vehicles are HGVs and 20% of the make-up on the A75 are HGVs, it demonstrates just how oversubscribed it is and therefore how much its infrastructure is inadequate for that sort of traffic. We've had promises for years of upgrades. Some upgrades have happened, but there are key pinch points at Crocketford and Springholm, which are really desperate in need of improvement. And things have even got worse in the last month, because with the closure of the Holyhead ferry terminal, the increase in volume of traffic on the A75 is phenomenal. And it is costing business by reason of the delays, and it's costing lives, as the honourable member for Dumfries and Galloway referred to. And that is indeed a more important issue. So it's many, many years since I heard promises from Alex Salmond and others about the dualling of the A75. It needs to be delivered. And I do support the honourable member from Dumfries and Galloway in pressing the government. What is the answer from the union connectivity promise of money of £8 million, I think was the initial tranche, to pursue some of these issues? Is that £8 million still available? Has it been reduced? Has it been increased because of the cancellation of the HS2? What is the position and where is it? Because the fundamental question is not about what's going to be promised, it's what's going to be delivered. And we really have waited far too long. And I do say to this new government, show that you are a United Kingdom government by addressing a road which is a key link, which links one part of this United Kingdom through another into the rest of the United Kingdom and onwards. And let's get the A75 at last sorted out, please.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mrs. Lowbuck, and it's a real privilege to serve under your first chairmanship. I'll keep it brief because we are time constrained, and it's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman because he made so many of the points which are relevant to the A75. The A75 is a complete and utter failure by the SNP. In 2001, the SNP declared that the A75 was the most important strategic road in Scotland. And in over 20 years since then, virtually nothing other than essential improvements for road safety have taken place. In 2016, Hamza Youssef and John Swinney came to Dumfries for a transport summit to tell us how much they were going to do and what was going to happen. A few weeks ago, John Swinney came back after 8 years of nothing happening to tell us that he was now hearing that people were concerned about it. So let's, I hope, in a united basis, even including our SNP colleagues, send a very clear message to John Swinney that the people of Dumfries and Galloway, my constituents, people who have to drive, for example, between Cullen and Carrutherstone, which is virtually really a cart track, people would not recognise that as a trunk road or an A road, to send a message that we must get on with upgrading the road. The UK government have a key role in it because it is a strategic route has been identified, and we do need to hear what they intend to do to take on the UK Connectivity Fund. On rail, I was a very strong advocate in the previous Parliament of TransPennine being stripped of their franchise because the service that they provided through Lockerbie, from Glasgow, from Edinburgh, was totally and utterly inadequate. And if I had been the UK Transport Secretary, I would have taken it off Advanti as well, because they are not, the service which they have provided is not good enough. But the problem at the heart of that issue, and I hope the Minister will address it, and in a role will address it, is this issue between the Department for Transport and the Scottish Government, and who is ultimately responsible for issues that affect cross-border services. That needs to be sorted. Finally, my constituent Dennis Mayo, who is the 80-year-old councillor for Langham, wouldn't forgive me if I didn't raise with my honourable friend, who's been such a strong advocate for the Borders Rail, and I congratulate him bringing forward this debate, that the Borders Rail should go through Langham. And Dennis has argued that case for many, many years, and he would not want me to miss this opportunity to make that point.
Angus MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Oh, if only we had a road the quality of the A75. I dream of a road. The A82 going up Loch Lomond has to be one of the worst roads in Britain. Lorries cannot pass each other, buses cannot pass each other. That is the main trunk route up to the west. Camac Ferry, a complete disaster story, as we all know. I bet nobody here could guess how long it takes the 145 miles to travel from Mallaig to Glasgow. 5 hours and 20 minutes, average speed of less than 30 miles an hour. HS2, we dream of some of that money. The main road from Inverness to Skye has got single track with lay-bys in it. It's an absolute scandal in every possible way. I'd like to put forward a motion that Transport Scotland is closed down and the Scottish Government is not fit to run Transport Scotland. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Liberal Democrat spokesperson Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mrs Lowbuck. It's a pleasure to serve on your first occasion as chair, and I hope you have enjoyed it. It's also an honour to follow the Right Honourable Member for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Work in progress.
I always get these. Where was I? Yes, I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk for securing this debate. And I think the variation of complaints we've heard shows how serious it is. And I sympathise. It's a pleasure to follow my honourable friend because I sympathise. I spent much of my life travelling up and down that E82 and it hasn't got better in the 5 decades that I've been doing it. In fact, it's got worse in so many ways. But I represent Edinburgh. I'll say it quietly. I represent Edinburgh, and we are lucky because our airport in my constituency of Edinburgh West is the busiest in Scotland. Our railway station, Haymarket, is one of Scotland's busiest. And next door, we have Waverley. So we have the ability to travel west in Scotland, north, south, and down both coasts, east and west, to London. If only it were so for the rest of Scotland. Elsewhere does not share our easy access, and we desperately need investment. And of course, one of the frustrating things about that is that investment, the benefits are usually long-term and not immediate. But we only have to look at the Borders Rail link to see how important and how valuable they can be. Just last month, figures showed that the number of people using the Borders Railway increased by more than 30% at some stations between 2023 and 2024. Many of them were coming north, but ultimately heading south. Wouldn't it be much better to make it possible for them to go directly south to Carlisle? But unfortunately, the government have put a hold on the £10 million feasibility study into extending that route to Carlisle because of their capital investment review. And the Borders isn't alone. The government believes putting a halt on infrastructure projects is part of the answer to dealing with that black hole that they never tire of telling us they inherited and are using as an excuse for all manner of things. I think they're being short-sighted. It's clear that our infrastructure needs investment. Our trunk roads are lamentable and our railways are little better. Of all the routes, Avanti's London to Scotland West Coast direct route has the highest percentage of trains arriving at their destination between 30 minutes and 2 hours late. LNER Scottish routes are also the worst performing, and TransPennine's express routes between Manchester and Glasgow and Edinburgh had the worst punctuality and most cancellations in the most recent performance period. As Liberal Democrats, we want to see a new railway agency, a public body which would help to join up the industry from track to train, put commuters first, hold train companies to account and bring in wholesale reform of the broken fare system for all of the United Kingdom. We should invest in research and development to make the UK the world leader in zero-carbon flights and ensure more domestic flights use alternative fuels. This is particularly important for communities across the Highlands and Islands, for whom air travel, as my right honourable friend for Orkney and Shetland pointed out, is a lifeline for people and businesses, although generally only as far as Edinburgh or Glasgow. And that's not good enough. Edinburgh Airport, of course, is a major employer for my constituency and supports millions of pounds of investment into Edinburgh through business, tourism and hospitality, and the rest of Scotland too. And they've made substantial progress in reducing their carbon emissions. They're continuing to work on increasing the amount of sustainable aviation fuel. And that is something which benefits passengers flying across Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. And that's part of why I believe, Mrs Llewellyn-Buck, that this is a very timely debate. The work conducted by the Union Connectivity Review showed that there's a desire to travel more within the United Kingdom. Good transport links are a vital part of people being able to maintain connections with family and friends, get to work without being incredibly frustrated, and delivering infrastructure that works means that we can ensure we deliver the opportunity for so many to have a better quality of life that underpins almost everything about our day-to-day lives. But there's something that we need to remember when we're talking about investing in cross-border infrastructure specifically. Yes, it benefits the economy. It contributes to reducing the impact of climate change. But it represents something more for all of us. The development, the cementing of our union. Every UK government, particularly this one, has a responsibility to every corner of the United Kingdom. People's worlds might be getting smaller, but it's our job in this place to mitigate that. We know more is achieved when we work together. And wouldn't it help if we had better and more accessible transport links for all of Scotland to all of the rest of the United Kingdom?
Spokesperson Andrew Bowie.
Mrs Llewellyn-Buck, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I join other honourable and right honourable colleagues in congratulating you on your appointment? I hope you've enjoyed your first foray into Scottish politics this afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you back in this chamber on many an occasion as we continue the various debates. Indeed, this is the second time in 2 days that I found myself in this chamber debating issues pertaining to Scotland. Not enough, frankly, in my view. Can I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk, on securing this important debate. It's cross-border connectivity is an issue that he championed as an MSP, as a backbench MP, and indeed as a minister in the previous government, and continues that laudable work right now. And I am very pleased that so many colleagues from across Scotland have brought themselves, and indeed Northern Ireland, have come to the chamber this afternoon to discuss this important issue. As I said yesterday, others here, including the Minister, found ourselves in this chamber discussing the impact of the UK Government's budget on Scotland. To save honourable members present from looking up Hansard or going back on Parliament TV and watching, although I would recommend it, there were some stellar speeches delivered in this chamber yesterday afternoon. I'll give them a brief synopsis of the debate. For farmers, for family firms, oil and gas workers, the Scottish whisky industry and the Scottish economy in general, the budget was not good. But despite the best efforts of the Labour Party and the SNP to do what they can to undermine confidence, deter investment, stymie ambition, entrepreneurship and punish success, the fact is that across the UK, and especially in Scotland, we need growth, we need investment and we need new jobs. And for all of that, good connectivity to our biggest market by far, which is the rest of the UK, is key. It is integral for economic growth and for business, but also for leisure, for education and even health. Fundamentally, good transport links unlock opportunity across Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That is precisely why the Conservative government launched the Union Connectivity Review, and despite the lack of cooperation from the Scottish Government, made several critical commitments, including, as some have been mentioned already today, supporting enhancements to the A75 between Gretna and Stranraer to improve the main artery linking South West Scotland and Northern Ireland, recognising the vital importance of east-west connectivity within the United Kingdom. funding for dualling the A1 between Morpeth and Ellingham, a vital road route between England and Scotland, and providing funding for Network Rail to look at options for boosting capacity and improving services more broadly between England and Scotland. And in other important areas, we delivered improved transport connectivity, with major projects taking big strides forward. We were delivering long-awaited upgrades to the A1 coastal route between Newcastle and Berwick-upon-Tweed and Edinburgh, reducing congestion for the communities of Ashington, Felton, Alnwick and Amble. However, away from cross-border routes, for our responsibility for our roads, as has been said time and time again today, lies with the Scottish Government. So for those companies and individuals seeking to export fish, for example, landed at Peterhead or indeed on Orkney and Shetland, they are reliant on increasingly dangerous roads as a result of the SNP's failure to deliver on their promises to get to the border and then on into Europe. It has been almost 2 decades since we first heard the SNP make promises to improve some of Scotland's most dangerous roads, yet those promises remain undelivered and frankly broken. The A96, a road close to my heart, connecting Aberdeen and Inverness, the A90 and the A9 between the Central Belt and Inverness, all promised to be fully dualled by the SNP, but none, not one, have been. Of course, we now know that the promise to dual the A96 to Inverness by 2030 has been shelved completely, letting down people across the north-east of Scotland once again. And let's not even begin discussing Lawrence Kirk Junction in my constituency, or indeed just further north improvements to the Toll of Burness on the road between Aberdeen, Fraserburgh and Peterhead. So whilst we are rightly talking today about cross-border connectivity, let us not forget those who are reliant on the SNP to ensure they can get their goods and themselves to the border. Air travel, as has been raised by honourable members this afternoon, is similarly critical for not just business, but for remote settlements. We protected socially and economically vital domestic routes through public service obligations, and indeed we reformed how the PSOs operated to include routes that operate to and from different regions of the UK, rather than just into London. However, one particular route into London we did back was in Dundee, where in 2021 we provided up to £2.5 million to fund direct flights for a further 2 years between Dundee and London, keeping a critical route running and ensuring people at both ends of the UK could keep connected. And we cut the reduced rate of air passenger duty for domestic flights to just £6.50 and consulted on reform to airport landing slot allocations, including proposals to ring-fence some slots for domestic flights, something which the Right Honourable Gentleman for Orkney and Shetland raised is so important. And I'd be grateful if the Minister could today update the Chamber on the Government's position on this consultation, and indeed whether the Government intends to issue a response to the consultation on ring-fencing those domestic flights. When it comes to rail, we committed over £1 billion for East Coast mainline upgrades, including digital programme to replace Victorian infrastructure with digital signalling, provides drivers with continuous real-time information. This was designed to boost train performance and cut delays. It's hard to overstate the importance of the East Coast mainline. A third of the nation's population live within 20 minutes of an East Coast mainline, and together those populations produce more than 40% of the UK's GDP. But the dreadful decision of this government to hike air passenger duty will mean that people who do not live within a few hours of London on a main rail line, such as the East Coast Main Line, for example, those living and working in and around Aberdeen, will face higher rail fares and fewer options for travel. It punishes those who live outside the Central Belt and flies in the face of better connectivity around the United Kingdom. Which brings us back to the woeful record of the SNP government in Holyrood. As someone who has taken the long train journey from Aberdeen to London on many occasions, it is striking at the length of time it takes to reach Edinburgh. Almost a third of your travel time to London from Aberdeen, for example, is taken up just reaching Scotland's capital. The SNP promised, yet again, in 2016, £200 million to cut journey times between Aberdeen and the Central Belt by 2026. Almost 10 years on, and so far, not even 10% of that money has been spent. Like roads, people who rely on infrastructure for which the SNP are responsible to get to the border are failed by the Scottish Government. I would be delighted to give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
If you're not, perhaps you could. Thank you so much.
Well, of course, ferries are increasingly important, and I didn't want to embarrass the SNP member in the room by dwelling too much on ferries, because it's such an embarrassing record of which the Scottish Government have. But the ferry links between our islands and the mainland, be that Orkney and Shetland, the Western Isles, and of course across Northern Ireland, are vitally important to the economic success of our country, linking communities, providing essential routes for health, for leisure, for tourism, and indeed to export the goods that are produced in those communities. And frankly, the way that those communities, especially in the Western Isles, have been let down by SNP ineptitude to deliver new ferries on those routes has been embarrassing. The absolute the sight of windows being painted on the side of a ferry just so it can be launched in a publicity, a PR stunt by the former First Minister, I think will go down in history as one of the most embarrassing moments of the Scottish Government in recent times. And frankly, they owe an apology to those communities who have been so let down as a result of their failure to invest properly in the future. But not only the Western Isles, there are other communities who rely very much on ferry connectivity, and it's essential that they get the funding that they deserve. But not only is the Scottish Government's record on transport dismal, not only have we got questions to ask of them, we do also have questions for the UK Labour Government about its own record, both the decisions that's been taken and, again, on future plans. I'd be delighted to give way to my SNP friend.
I just wanted to ask the Honourable Member to put on record that for the last 14 years of austerity, he was actually part of the government for quite a significant period of that, and that included significant reductions in overall capital expenditure. And does he think that helped or hindered investment in strategic capital transport projects?
I think what hindered most investment in strategic transport projects was the ineptitude of the Scottish Government. We've already, myself and other colleagues, gone through the litany of broken promises by the SNP to communities across Scotland, be that the A96, the A9, the A90, be that the work on the A75, be that new ferries to the Western Isles, be that protection of air routes across Scotland. I think it's quite rich of a Scottish National Party member to stand up and talk about underfunding of investment in transport when their own record is so woeful in that regard. And it might be the reason that he and his colleagues only have 9 members of Parliament. One of the reasons, 9 members of Parliament in this current Parliament, as opposed to the large numbers that they had in the previous Parliament. But I have moved on from talking about the SNP, and I'd like to focus on the UK Labour Government, because we also have plans for them. We are yet to see... Oh, yes, of course, yes.
Just a minor point, obviously, as my dear friends tussle, is, of course, the Conservative government were in power for the last 14 years, until July. The SNP government has been in power in Holyrood for about 18 years. So it's quite remarkable to start criticising a government that's been clearing up a mess left by the Tories. We've been in power for just 6 months. And might I gently ask my right honourable friend to bear in mind those different time periods as he proceeds?
Well, I hadn't actually gotten round to criticising the Labour government yet, so if you give me time, I will actually get there. But I'd just like to gently point out that this concocted mess that the Labour Party like to trot out is as nothing compared to the economic situation that we had to deal with when we came into government in coalition with the Liberal Democrats in 2010, which led to so many of the tough decisions that we took between 2010 and indeed 2015. And it's a direct result of decisions taken in this recent budget that has seen growth falling, confidence slipping, investment drying up, and indeed today gilt bonds rising to their highest level in over 20 years. That's on the Labour Party's watch and has nothing to do with the Conservatives. Left them with a record of the highest growth in the G7, inflation down to 2% and investment at record levels. I'm proud of our record in government, and I hope, very much hope for himself that he'll be able to stand there at the end of his time on the governing party's benches and say just the same. As I said, we have questions for the UK Labour Government. We are yet to see a convincing reason for the cancelling of the last government's plans to dual the A1 between Morpeth and Ellingham. So would the Minister be able to lay out what those reasons were? There are questions about what rail nationalisation will mean for upgrade projects currently underway, which will benefit union-wide connectivity. And like we've seen with ScotRail, should we expect fare rises in Scotland for services to England after rail is nationalised by Labour? On the Borders Railway, as my honourable friend for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk asked, could the Minister update the House on where we are with the Tweedbank to Carlisle corridor? And what was the reason that the feasibility study has been abandoned? On air passenger duty, what do they say to those people living in Scotland further away from the border who rely on air links to get to cities south of the border for business and indeed for leisure? The record of the government so far on transport more broadly gives us cause for concern and makes us quite sceptical that union connectivity is a priority for ministers, or indeed likely to improve over this Parliament. The Prime Minister himself said that Labour-run Wales should be a blueprint for what a UK Labour government could achieve. That's terrifying, but we all know what that really means. We've seen the imposition of blanket 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, the cancellation of major road building projects, and Labour has cast doubt on its plans to electrify the North Wales main line. So what does Labour-run Wales mean for the rest of the United Kingdom? Yes.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way, particularly as he was reaching some kind of crescendo, I think. He mentions 20 mile an hour in Wales. Does he welcome the reduction in accidents that scheme's resulted in?
Of course we welcome a reduction in the number of accidents, but I've yet to see any evidence that this is a direct result of blanket 20-mile, which, by the way, I don't think the Labour Party in Wales is actually still in favour of. I do believe that the new First Minister actually abandoned the blanket 20-mile-an-hour policy. It's something certainly that I think would be greatly worrying should it be rolled out across Scotland. Look, good connectivity, good transport connections are essential. Within Scotland, connecting communities and creating opportunity. That responsibility within Scotland lies with the SNP. But our internal market is vital to the economic success of Scotland and the wider United Kingdom. Connections from Scotland to England and indeed across Great Britain and Northern Ireland are integral to making economic progress that we need. And this is the responsibility of the British Labour government. So now it's time for now it's time for action, not words. Scotland's economy, Scotland's communities desperately need that. Thank you.
Now call the Minister, Kirsty McNeill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Welcome to your place. And may I first start by congratulating the honourable member and my predecessor as Scotland Westminster for securing this important debate. And I'm very pleased to respond on behalf of the government this afternoon. So I'd like to begin with where he began his remarks, and I commend the honourable member's tireless commitment to his constituents, including his work on the Borderlands Inclusive Growth Deal. He will therefore, I'm sure, have been very pleased that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, confirmed at the budget that funding will be provided for the continuation of all city and growth deals in Scotland, including the Borderlands Inclusive Growth Deal. We've also approved the final 2 growth deals, including one that's expanded to ensure that all 12 areas of Scotland can benefit. Indeed, Madam Chair, it's because of the decisions that this government has taken that I'm delighted we've been able to confirm the UK Government's commitment to invest nearly £1.4 billion into important local projects across Scotland over the next 10 years. That's positive news for all Borderland partners and a wide range of projects within the growth deal, including £65 million for initiatives in Scotland. Nonetheless, I know he's anxious about another matter. Despite these ambitious commitments, I am cognizant of the uncertainty that remains around the future of the Borders Railway feasibility study. We have been very clear about the challenging financial circumstances we've inherited and the need to plan for infrastructure differently. And whilst the honourable member for Edinburgh West may be tired of hearing about this, it is an unfortunate reality that we have to continue to address by taking difficult decisions to fix the foundations of our economy. My ministerial colleagues at the Department for Transport are continuing to consider the proposals developed as part of the deal and hope to be able to communicate their decision on the UK Government's commitments to this particular project very shortly. The honourable member for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk has also asked, as have other members, about the dualling of the A1, and I was asked specifically to explain the government's decision. The answer behind that decision is very simple. The previous UK Government administration made an unfunded and unaffordable commitment to dual the A1 between Morpeth and Ellingham, and as my right honourable friend the Chancellor has made clear, if we can't afford it, we cannot do it. The decision is simple. It's because of the unfunded nature of the commitment. My honourable friends for Livingston, Edinburgh East and Musselburgh and Glasgow East have all made eloquent advocacy on behalf of rail passengers who are subject to poor rail performance. I want to reassure them that the Department for Transport will continue to hold all operators to account for their performance through a range of measures, including key performance indicators, and the Government simply won't tolerate poor performance and will continue to hold operators to account, regardless of ownership. The honourable members for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross and the member for Orkney and Shetland have asked if I will champion Scotland's air passengers, and I will do so. The Scotland Office, of course, stands ready to advance the interests of all of Scotland's communities. Please.
I absolutely recognise the importance of air travel to more rural parts of the country, but it's a fact that a journey between Edinburgh and London that is done by electric train, such as Lumo, produces 95% less carbon emissions than the equivalent flight. Other countries take decisions to disincentivise domestic air travel where rail routes are available. Does the Minister recognise the imperative of the climate emergency that we have to bring to bear when we're talking about whether government should incentivise rail travel over flights?
Thank you, Madam Chair, very much so. And indeed, the integrated transport strategy that I'll come to shortly is indeed designed to make sure that we are delivering growth, delivering on our climate ambitions and delivering for communities facing a cost of living emergency. The honourable member for Murray West, Nairn and Strathspey took, to my mind, the inexplicable decision to put himself up as a spokesperson for the Scottish Government on transport, and his account of the ferries amounted to, yes, it would have been better were it not a complete shambles. And I'm sure we can all agree on that. Indeed, it would be. But the facts are these. The Ferguson's ferry saga has continued, with repeated delays to both the Glen Sannox and warnings that the Glen Rosa may not be delivered now until late 2025. Let us never tire of saying the total cost of the two ferries is expected to be as much as nearly 400 million, 7 years late and 4 times the original budget. But of course, that's not the only place where the SNP are failing so badly. Under the SNP's government, Scotland's bus network has been dismantled route by route, day by day. Fares have risen, passenger numbers have plummeted, and the number of bus routes in Scotland has gone down by 44% between 2006-07 and 2023-24, a loss of nearly 1,400 routes for our communities. We should be clear, of course, however, that the wider questions of transport are devolved, and responsibility for transport matters in Scotland sits largely with that Scottish Government. This Government is committed, despite that Scottish Government's failures, to resetting our relationship with the Scottish Government when we are able to do so to deliver for the people of Scotland. And we've already made significant progress to that end. In that context, I want to recognise that the role of Transport Scotland plays in keeping Scotland connected with the rest of the United Kingdom. But as an executive agency of the Scottish Government, the UK Government naturally recognises Transport Scotland's independence. We do nonetheless, of course, stand ready to support its delivery for the people of Scotland where appropriate. So, Madam Chair, this Government is one that respects the devolution settlement and is firmly committed to working with the Scottish Government to deliver shared transport priorities and ensure the economic benefits of improved connectivity are shared across the UK. The UK Government is also committed to our growth mission to improve the prosperity of the country and the living standards of working people. That's why the Chancellor has pledged to drive sustainable economic growth, and a strong transport network serving communities across the UK will, of course, be key to that.
I welcome much of what the Honourable Ladies had to say of the non-political nature anyway. But can she tell us what is this Government's approach to the UK connectivity report? Because clearly that was focused on ensuring a network across the United Kingdom, bringing the United Kingdom together.
Yes, I'm delighted to do so, and of course the honourable member for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine has asked me about that too. We are delivering on the recommendations made by the Union Connectivity Review conducted by my noble friend Lord Henry. The review highlighted the need for strategic transport connectivity improvements across the UK and made recommendations to support improved connectivity to, from and via Scotland. I've been asked by a number of honourable members, including from Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweedale, from Dumfries and Galloway, who spoke very movingly about accidents on the A75, and colleagues from Strongford and Northern Antrim for an update on our plans on the A75 and connectivity to Northern Ireland, and I'm delighted to provide it, because that Henry review recommended upgrading the key A75 link to improve freight and passenger connectivity with Northern Ireland. So I'm very pleased to say that the Chancellor has confirmed funding for Transport Scotland to continue development work on upgrading the A75 for this financial year and for next. And initial work has been completed by Transport Scotland to scope out possible options for the realignment of the A75 around the settlements of Springholm and Crocketford. I will.
Jim Shannon.
Appreciate it. I had asked specific questions. I'm sorry to, and apologies for reiterating it again, Madam Chair, but it's to do with the Stena Line, it's to do with the ferries, it's to do with the food, the medicine, the deliveries, the continuity, the connection, which quite clearly we don't have a roads. We just can't drive across the RIC unless we find that new James Bond car or something. But if we can't find that, then we depend on ferries. So to get our goods across. So just, can I ask that question, please, if you don't mind? I'm sorry to ask it again, but I really need that answer. And if you can't give it to me now, please. I'm happy if it's sent in by letter form as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. My understanding is those ferries are operated commercially, but I'd be delighted to meet with him and with colleagues from the Department for Transport.
That's an upgrade.
Okay, as I said, I'm delighted to meet with him and colleagues from the Department for Transport to follow up on that further. I'm furthermore pleased to say that the Scottish Government have also confirmed their commitment to the feasibility study of the A75 changes to progress that work, and that is our reset in action. My honourable friend, the member for Bathgate and Linlithgow, anchored, I think, this debate very helpfully in what it is all about. Of course it is about growth, of course it is about the maintenance of the union, but transport is also fundamentally about people, about women, about disabled people, about families living with the cost of living emergency, which is why, when families are so up against it, it remains inexplicable to me that it is cheaper to fly under the SNP government. It is cheaper to fly from Edinburgh to London than it is to go from Edinburgh to Glasgow on a ScotRail peak fare. That's why this government has already fulfilled one of our key manifesto commitments and passed the Passenger Railway Services Bill to bring railways back into public ownership, because we are committed to functioning railways. That will stop the taxpayer footing the bill for more than £100 million each year in fees to private operators, which provides no benefit whatsoever to passengers or the taxpayer. The bill will ensure that ScotRail is kept in public hands permanently and will pave the way for the creation of Great British Railways, ending the fragmentation of the franchising system. That will improve our railway network and strengthen connectivity to and from Scotland, including via the vital West Coast and East Coast main lines. Now, my colleague, the honourable member for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, has asked a number of questions on air passenger duty that I'm delighted to answer. As he'll know, we are trying to support a fairer and sustainable tax system, and taxation on the aviation sector has to be put on a sustainable footing. That's why we're consulting on a proposal to extend the scope of the higher rate of the air passenger duty to all private jets, including business jets. That's driven primarily by the Government's commitment to ensuring that operators and passengers of such aircraft contribute fairly to the public finances. As he will well know, air passenger duty rates have fallen behind inflation and private jets are relatively under-taxed. So for 2026-27, the Government will adjust all air passenger duty rates to help correct for below-inflation operating in recent years. Because we are so committed to supporting working people, Madam Chair, this Government has frozen fuel duty and has extended the temporary 5p cut for 1 year. That will benefit an estimated 3.2 million people in Scotland, supporting hard-working families and businesses and saving the average car driver £59 in the years 2025 to 26. I'm sure I don't need to remind colleagues here that as the cost of living remains high, these measures are vital to support working people across the UK. As I mentioned earlier, none of these decisions can be taken piecemeal. They must form part of a coherent and ambitious plan. That's why this UK Government is mission-led with long-term objectives that will deliver our plan for change and spread prosperity across the UK. I'd like to end by once again congratulating the honourable member for securing this debate and thanking all honourable members for their interventions. I'm sure colleagues from across the House will agree with me that it is essential that we continue to do all we can to strengthen our transport network, ensuring communities from Scotland and across the UK remain connected and play their rightful role at the heart of this Government's ambitious agenda.
Before I invite John Lamont to wind up, I just want to thank all honourable and right honourable members for their kind words today. It is indeed a pleasure to be in this chair. John Lamont.
We've done a spectacular job as chair, I might say, on behalf of all members here. I'm grateful to all honourable and right honourable members for contributing to today's debate from across Scotland, but also from Ulster, and the important points that they made about the connections between their part of the world and Scotland and the rest of the UK, and for the Minister for her response. I look forward to hearing from her further on the Borders Railway feasibility study. We've heard about the importance of transport links, not just to our respective constituents, but linking to all parts of the United Kingdom from a strategic importance, but also from a symbolic importance in terms of preserving our union. I think there's a shared frustration across the House, perhaps with the exception of one honourable member, about the failures of the Scottish Government and the SNP in terms of their responsibilities in delivering good transport links for our constituents. And certainly on this side of the House is perhaps a shared frustration about some of the decisions that the UK Government, the new Labour Government, have made in terms of funding projects into Scotland. As we've heard earlier, the A1 improvements have been a bit of a disappointment for my constituents and those in Northumberland. So we do hope the UK Government will continue to commit to the previous commitments that the previous Government made in terms of investment into our transport network in Scotland, despite the devolved responsibilities of the Scottish Government. I might just conclude by responding to the member from Edinburgh East and his very helpful description about the name of Waverley Station. I fully admit to being a daft laddie from the Borders countryside, but I was fully aware of the name of the Waverley Station. Of course, the Waverley Station was named after the Waverley Route, which was the railway line that went from Edinburgh down through the Borders to Carlisle, so I'm very familiar with that, which of course was named after the books, the novels written by Sir Walter Scott, who is a fine son of the Borders, which I think is a good place to conclude this debate. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered transport links between Scotland and the rest of the UK. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order.